when you see that something is so important and then you see how broken the system is, like it just kind of lit a fire underneath my bum.
That's Sahil Chopra. After becoming a doctor trained at UCLA and Harvard, he felt a calling to build a startup.
In healthcare, it's very easy for physicians to become like cog in a system.
And he realized there was a silent epidemic. People aren't sleeping enough.
I became aware of how big of a foundational component it is of anyone's health.
He told me his best founder wellness tips, how to stay even-keeled as a founder, and why you should solve problems you have yourself. This is Sahil Chopra's founding journey.
Sahil, what's up, man? Welcome to the pod. Thanks for coming on.
No, thank you, man. Excited to chat today.
Yeah, it's been a while. You were a doctor before you were a founder. And I want to talk about that a little bit because being a doctor and becoming a doctor takes years of, highly specialized training, learning, labs, all that sort of stuff. And then you were like, no, you know what? I want to build a business instead. What drove you to that decision?
I think it's a couple of things, man. I grew up in a immigrant household, and I think like grit gets built into you at that time. Parents immigrated from India. My dad did all sorts of odd jobs, eventually had a business of his own. So I kind of got the chance to see what it is like to own some kind of a business. That was always like probably somewhere in the back of my mind. And then I think sort of in healthcare, it's very easy for physicians to become like cog in a system, so to speak. And it's like not a lot of, physicians use this term all the time. Like it feels like a grind and you're just sort of grinding away, and burnout is really high. And there's sometimes lack of innovation, especially in larger healthcare systems. So I think like the combination of like seeing what can happen if you have a business of your own and not really enjoying working in large healthcare systems as a cog. And then on top of that, my co-founder and brother, he comes from the world of startups. So I think the three of those like sort of converged and just kind of set us up to at least give this a shot.
Yeah. How did Sagar convince you to take the leap, man? It's it's a very different world. I think you even found your first few customers while you were still working in the ICU, if I'm right about that.
Yeah. I think it was the other way around. Like I had to convince Sagar to like, hey, I think like we have something really interesting. It's so funny. Sagar was working. So when I was in my sleep medicine fellowship in Boston at Harvard, and he was finishing he was doing his MBA at Wharton. Like I was tinkering with this idea of like some kind of a sleep company, and he was actually working on a separate company. He had actually raised money for this company. And this was during COVID. They had raised, like, I don't know, like $70,000 through different pitch competitions to solve the problem at the time, building a marketplace where consumers can find home-cooked food in their local community from like a home kitchen. So it was like, he was really interested in that kind of like logistics, fulfillment, but in the food space. And so he was already working on that. And so I kind of had to like loop him in to, hey man, like, healthcare is like a really interesting field. There's a lot of value that can be created. And I think like sleep is really a foundational component to everything. And let's try to do this together. And I think what sort of kicked this off was we did a couple of pitch competitions together while he was in school. And the chemistry worked out really well. We were able to raise a little bit of money, and I think he just kind of dropped that idea and said, I think Sahil might be partially correct, and I think I can help him, and let me join. And then we sort of built Empower Sleep together.
Want to get more insights like that? Each week, I actually interview multiple founders. For the ones who don't join the podcast, I write up a case study and share it with all founding journey members. I also write weekly tactical deep dives, share startup opportunities, and analyze trends that I'm noticing. We've also got a community of founders, an investor and pitch deck database, and more fun stuff like over $60,000 in perks and discounts to help you build, grow, and raise capital for your startup. Go to join.foundingjourney.com to get access.
What are like the pros and cons of being co-founders with your brother? Startups are super stressful. People say don't work with family. You guys work so closely together. Like, what are the pros and cons?
Dude, Sagar is like such a lovable person that I have a hard time thinking of like what can be some cons. I think like, me being older and us coming from like an Indian culture, sometimes he may not like express his anger or annoyance towards me if he really wanted to. And I feel like kind of bad about that. If I goof up, but for us, I don't like we've been pretty close for such a long time, and we have such a mutually respectful relationship. Yeah, it's kind of hard to find cons, at least for us, but the pros are pretty amazing from the standpoint like, our parents are proud. I think they couldn't have asked for anything more, and to do something with someone with whom you have sort of an infinite amount of trust it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you guys have a relationship that extends beyond the company, which a lot of co-founding teams can't say really.
Totally.
You guys obviously, I mean, you mentioned this, you guys have very different backgrounds, right? He's coming from the tech business operations world. You're coming from the healthcare space. I knew Sagar when we were both at Uber, and he's a hardcore operator. He gets a lot of things done. He's very, very effective at what he does. How do those styles come together when you guys are working? Like if your co-founder comes from a very different background, very different styles, what can other founders sort of take away from that?
It's been really interesting. A couple of years ago, I would have like conversations with other physicians of like, hey, this is what I want to do. Like, would you be open to joining? And there's like a ton of overlap on skill sets. And like the other person is just like another version of you to some extent. And then when you work with someone who has a completely different background, but you work really well together, I think that's like, it's a blessing because they can take on things in a fundamentally different way. They bring a whole new level of creativity to problem solving that when you have people of like the same background, you might not think of it that way. And so it's been a lot of fun. And like, I've learned a ton of things from Sagar of like how to be really scrappy. Like, let's just do it and then figure it out afterwards, And so it's been, I've found like tremendous value in learning from Sagar, seeing how he like systematically thinks through problems that are like operational and how to execute upon them. It's been transformative for my own personal development.
So you were originally the CEO, but now Sagar's the CEO. How did you guys make that decision, and how do you make the original decision for you to be CEO?
Yeah, we decided that Sagar would be a better person, a better fit for CEO, even though like a lot of the decisions are made, collectively. I feel like Sagar is just better at making and executing on decisions than I might be. I kind of think of myself more of like sort of the keeper of the vision, the keeper of the mission of like, hey, why are we doing what we're doing, and keep the team rallied up for that standpoint. But all of the financial decisions, although made collectively, like I totally trust his judgment, and I think he does a better job at like thinking through things than I might. When we were going through like fundraising, and like I just didn't have the time. Like if I stepped away from clinic, that would kill revenue. And if revenue dropped, then like it would be much harder to fundraise. So it was like, dude, Sagar, you're like better at this. You're a phenomenal storyteller, and you're way more organized than I am in running a process. So like and like a couple of our investors said that, they had advised us that the fundraising should be done by the CEO. And it was just like, that sort of fell into his lap. And I think it's been like no looking back ever since.
Was there any like awkwardness with investors when you guys made that switch and that transition?
No, I don't think we like publicly said anything about it. It was just like an internal conversation between the three of us co-founders. And I was like, yeah, this makes Sagar the CEO. Like, because the thing is, like, man, at least for us, like, who cares about the title, right? Like, at the end of the day, like, all we are hoping for and wanting is that this company is successful and that we can create the value that we want it to demonstrate, to create for people in the future. And Sagar's the CEO, I'm the CEO, Maxime is. I don't think that really, there's nothing in the titles. Like, I'd rather have a successful company than like me being the CEO and like this not being as successful as it can be.
Yeah. At the end of the day, who should be the CEO has to be a totally non-ego driven decision by all parties.
Totally.
I want to talk about fundraising because we dove into it a little bit there. When you guys first started fundraising, I think together, it happened without you guys prompting. You weren't going out and trying to raise a round right away. How did that happen? And how did you sort of decide to go out and raise money once you got that interest?
I think a couple of things. The initial sort of funding that came in was through different pitch competitions. Like, I was doing a couple of pitch competitions in parallel. The first check that we received when I won a pitch competition was like for $20,000, and that was like, wow, like somebody would actually give us $20,000 to build what I think we can build. And then in parallel, Sagar was still in Wharton at the time, so there was a couple of different scout funds that we were pitching collectively to, and then there was a couple of pitch competitions. So like the process kind of got started that way. But it wasn't, I'm calling it a process, but it wasn't like a proper fundraising process where you allocate a certain amount of time and you raise and then you stop raising and then you go back to building. It was just sort of like snacking on fundraising over a period of, say, maybe a year and a half, while building at the same time. And that's kind of how we got started. And then thank you, Michael, for investing in Empower Sleep as well.
Yeah, it was a no-brainer. And you guys got some great people involved too. You got Balaji, you got Dorm Room Fund, you got Rough Draft. I think for a team that was, as you said, snacking on fundraising, you guys did a pretty good job of getting in front of the right people.
Yeah, we got pretty lucky. And I think like the problem of helping the world sleep better resonates with other individuals who are passionate about healthcare. And once they understand like what we're doing and how we're doing it, I think it becomes a little bit easier to say, okay, these guys have a good team. They at least have like founder market fit. Can they get founder market product fit? That's a separate question, but like I think they can probably figure it out.
When you're in that sort of process where it's just sort of a rolling process as you meet the right people, how do you decide, when enough is enough, you've taken on enough capital and you do say, all right, let's go heads down for a bit, when you flip that switch?
For us, I think we were pretty naive and probably not doing it the right way. We were just building while snacking at the same time, to be completely honest. And whenever there would be like a larger investment, it helped us sort of grow the balls to say, okay, like we're going to actually hire somebody to help us do this thing that we've been trying to do, but we didn't have the resources to do. And then, okay, there's some more growth. And it's like, hey, you go talk to somebody else. Hey, we actually grew another 15% month over month. We just brought this person on. And what are your thoughts? Would you be open to supporting us on our mission and vision? And some additional funding comes in, and then you use that money to do something else and grow the company a little bit more. So it's been like it's not super efficient. And I would be curious to hear, Sagar's thoughts on this, but that's kind of how we got started.
Yeah, you guys basically raised a bunch of micro rounds in quick succession.
Yeah, I guess that's the term for this, huh? Micro rounds.
So you mentioned hiring then, right there. How important is hiring early on, and when should founders really start to devote attention to that? Do you wish you would have done it sooner, later? How do you think about it?
Yeah, no, I think that's been a key learning for me, is hiring good people early on, even if they charge more. Hiring quick and firing quick has been like the big thing that I've learned in the last couple of years. That if you find someone, look for people who who you think can add value. And if they don't demonstrate value, like not to wait like arbitrary 3 months time span. If they don't demonstrate value based off of the metrics that you want them to achieve, then like let them go sooner rather than later. And like those key hires for us was like on the clinical team for Sagar, on like the operations team, and then on the engineering for Maxime on the engineering team. And I think like the way that I thought of this in the early days was, do I have enough work that I am doing that I can give to somebody else? And can I go get more work for them to do? And once you hit like that sort of, when you think you're on that inflection point of, okay, like I'm doing some task, like in my case, seeing patients. Am I seeing enough patients where I can give this task to them and them being able to sort of pay off their salary by the work that they're doing, and then I'll go do something else, and that's kind of how on the clinical side we've been thinking of things.
So I can't believe that we've made it almost 20 minutes into this conversation and we haven't talked about sleep yet. It's blowing my mind that we haven't talked about sleep. You guys obviously know way more about sleep than I do. Founders in general get terrible sleep, and I think most that I've talked to, and even myself, consider it sort of a trade-off that's worth making to preserve either, more productivity or time for other things like family, exercise, or just leisure or anything else. Why is that a mistake? Why should I not be doing that?
Yeah, it's a tough problem to solve. And it's, the thing about sleep is like our physiology is very resilient. Like we can, a couple of days and we can push ourselves and sleep a little bit less and still be able to function reasonably well. But in the long run, it's like not a smart move at all. And, like people who don't sleep well, they can't think as clearly. There is like, when you look at, there's a test that you can do as it's called the psychomotor vigilance test, where you basically measure one's vigilance and their level of alertness. And like people who don't sleep well, their level of alertness is much lower than people who do sleep well. If you're, as a founder, making complex decisions, sleep is like a really critical component of that, because the decisions that you make are not just going to affect you, but they're going to affect everybody in the organization. And the organization is an amplification of the founders, essentially. And so if the founders are not in a good place, I think that will be reflected downstream. So yeah, I agree with you. Like making your health and sleep a priority will only allow you to unlock a better version of yourself. And building a startup it's a marathon, right? It's not a sprint. At least if we think that you want to build a company that lives a very long time, then it's definitely a marathon. It's kind of a long-term game. So health and your own health and wellness is a critical component of that. And sleep is the foundation of a lot of this.
So how much sleep should I be getting?
It depends on the individual. It depends on their age. It depends on what they do during the day. But generally speaking, 7 to 8 hours of like total sleep is adequate, and probably 7 to 9 hours of sleep opportunity for most people is probably adequate. I know it's hard to get that much because of competing priorities, but that's usually like a decent amount of time. It's a reasonable amount of time.
Why do you think that it's so either misunderstood by some people, not known, or just ignored by others? Why do we not prioritize it like we should?
I think there's multiple things, right? One is on like the patient side or the consumer side, there's just a ton of lack of awareness, or there was. Now there's more because of these consumer grade wearables. So there has always been a lack of awareness of the importance of sleep. There has been this sort of storytelling that sleeping less is macho, especially in residency, right? Like residency fellowship. Man, like I remember our attendings telling us like, oh dude, like, what do you mean you can't work 36 hours? When I was in residency or fellowship, I wouldn't see my family for like 3 days. And like you guys are complaining because you have to work 36 hours in a row. And and now things are changing. Now it's down to 18 hours, but that's still like a lot of time to be like consecutively like, working nonstop and in a hospital setting. So I think it's a lot of it is culture. Part of that culture is probably driven by lack of awareness. And then on the medical side, unfortunately, we're just not educated on sleep. Like if you look at med school curriculum, last I looked at this, you get like 3 hours of education on sleep. And that's also true for like, you get very little education on nutrition. You get very little education on exercise. So it's some of these like core foundational things that are like so important. We're just not taught about them.
Yeah, we don't talk about the universals. We talk about the highly specific edge cases, right? And, it's not just founders. I mean, you even talk about doctors themselves. How widespread is this? How many people, I don't know the metric, I don't know the numbers. How many people in America are, deficient?
Yeah, if you go to the CDC website or any of like the WHO websites and you look at some of the statistics, it's, gosh, I feel like I'm going to say the wrong number, but it's like 50 to 70% of people like report some level of like sleep deprivation. It's crazy. And that's sleep deprivation because of, insufficient sleep opportunity. But then that's like, the thing about that is that's controllable by that individual because they can give themselves more opportunity if they wanted to. But what is like, I think a bigger problem is that almost 20% of humans actually have a sleep disorder. Yeah, because the prevalence of sleep apnea is about 10% of the population. There's 1 billion people globally who have sleep apnea, and almost 1 billion people have chronic insomnia. And so like, it's one thing to say that you're sleep deprived because you gave yourself, insufficient opportunity. But what's even more profound is like a big chunk of the population actually has a sleep disorder that will require the help of some clinician at some point in time.
I had no idea that the numbers were that big. That's like way, way more than I would have expected to hear. That's crazy. I don't have sleep apnea. I don't have chronic insomnia, but I'm really bad at sleeping. I probably have conditioned my body at this point to expect 6 hours a night. I wake up at 7, even without an alarm, just because that's what I'm used to. How screwed am I if I don't change that, basically?
Building an audience is a full-time job, or at least it can feel like that when you're busy running your startup. But with AI making software easier to build, getting distribution is more important than ever. I can help. After growing my LinkedIn to over 40,000 followers and having 100,000 across all platforms, as well as a 60,000 subscriber newsletter, I know how impactful having an audience can be when you're building a startup these days. So I started Megaphone Studios, a ghostwriting agency specifically built for founders and their startups. Think of us like your startup's chief content officer. We turn your LinkedIn, X, or newsletter into a machine for lead generation, follower growth, and building your influence as a thought leader in your space. Our process is super lightweight for you while still delivering content that only you uniquely could write. And our plans are flexible with no long-term lock-in because we know how fast things can change at startups. Oh, and I brought my buddy Blake Emal along to help me run the business. He has even more followers than I do. So email me at hauk@megaphone.network and mention the pod for a first month discount.
It's a good question. And I think it really it really depends. And I'll sort of ask you a follow-up question. How do you feel when you wake up in the morning?
I usually feel pretty good.
Okay. So you feel good when you wake up. How's your overall energy level during the day?
It's good, especially if I will work out. If I don't work out and I'm just sitting on the couch working or something like that, then maybe I'll get tired.
So if you're sedentary, you will feel tired. And then what time do you typically go to bed?
Somewhere between 12 and 2.
12 and 2. And like, is your sleep onset pretty fast?
Yeah, I fall asleep right away.
And so what I'm hearing from you, or let me ask you this then. If you are not in an environment filled with devices or things to do, like on vacation or something, when you get more sleep, do you subjectively feel better?
I mean, I probably feel better just because I'm on vacation.
It's a possibility. But what if you're at home and it's like you just chose like, you know what, I'm going to do this experiment where even though I feel tired, maybe say 11 or midnight, I force myself or I keep myself occupied. I participate in something cognitively stimulating so that I can stay awake a little bit longer to then fall asleep. If you give yourself the opportunity to fall asleep earlier, the question becomes, how do you feel the next day and over a week? And if you feel better, I would argue that, hey, I think you're actually sleep deprived. You just don't know how good you can feel until you actually feel good again. Because, 6 hours of like total sleep opportunities, like pretty short. So the thing about sleep is if you plot this out on a graph where on the x-axis you have total sleep duration, and on the y-axis you have mortality, and you plot this out and you get kind of like a U-shaped graph. People who are very short sleepers, who have very insufficient sleep opportunity for whatever reason, they have a higher mortality over a period of time. And those who have very long sleep durations, they too have a much higher mortality over a period of time. And this isn't causal. This is not a causal relationship. It's an association. So what that tells us is like, is there something going on with someone's physiology that they are having to sleep a lot that's causing some downstream problem? Or is there something that is going on with their physiology where they're not sleeping enough and there's something occult going on? So sleep is kind of like a window into someone's health. And the question, like in your situation, like how screwed are you? I don't know. But I would sort of counter that with a request, like, hey, like give yourself some more sleep opportunity and see how you feel. And if you feel better, I think the likelihood of being screwed is much higher than if you feel the same. Then you can say that maybe like Michael is biologically a short sleeper. And there's actually a way to measure this. And one of the things that we've been doing at Empower Sleep is if you sample someone's melatonin, like salivary melatonin, like say 9 samples over a 24-hour period, you can figure out, and melatonin is a surrogate of someone's nighttime. It's a surrogate of the biologic night. It's because it's a circadian marker, but melatonin only rises when the body thinks it's nighttime. So if you can actually map this out and you can figure out, is Michael's biologic night short and that's why he functions well even with 6 hours sleep? Or is Michael's biologic sleep long where it's like 8 hours or 9 hours, but he's only giving himself less, he's only giving himself like 6 or 7 hours. And then I can say like with a little bit more precision that I think, you're probably more screwed if you're chronically, that there is a subtle sense of sleep deprivation that one is having. And the other thing that you can actually also do, it's like if we were looking at your aura data, is that, sleep architecture is different over the course of the night. And the first half of the night is predominated by a lot of deep sleep. And the latter half of the night is predominated by a lot of REM sleep. So if you give yourself more sleep opportunity and you have an increase in the amount of REM sleep, I can almost guarantee you that you were chronically sleep deprived and you weren't giving yourself enough opportunity and you had less REM sleep as a byproduct of that from a percentage distribution. So there's ways to sort of get a sense, but we would need to look at some objective metrics to be a little bit more precise. But generally speaking, I would just say, give yourself more sleep opportunity for a week. Try it and see what happens. And if you feel better, then the likelihood of that person being not in optimal health is a lot higher than if they're able to if they feel exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, you're making me think I should go do that test that you mentioned.
Yeah, we'll mail it to you. We'll mail it to you, and I would love to, do like a few weeks of sleep testing data because, one of the problems that's happened and I don't know, and I think this may resonate with you, is people do a test to identify disease. That's one way to look at a test. But the other way to look at the test is, or any like diagnostic test, is how optimal are these values? And like if you do someone's sleep study or sleep testing, or you look at their aura data, you can ask, instead of saying, okay, it's like, instead of saying that someone has fragmented sleep or sleep apnea or restless legs or something of that nature, you can also ask the question, like, how optimal is this person's sleep? And if it's not, like, why is that the case? And like, what can we do to help them optimize that? So like, I think even diagnostic tests can be used multiple ways. One, to like identify pathology, but then also using them to help optimize that health of that organ system that's being evaluated.
So with Empower Sleep, how are you guys tackling that? What's the vision?
And there's like a lot to unpack there, but but basically it's providing people personalized sleep care using their sleep biomarkers across time with medical grade diagnostics. And the example that I like to give is, you can take care of a diabetic using a hemoglobin A1C every 3 months. How much insulin do they need? Is the metformin working? What medications are working? What are not? But then you can also take care of a diabetic using a continuous glucose monitor. And it's fundamentally different because now you can identify from a behavioral lifestyle standpoint, like how are these foods, activities influencing your glycemic and metabolic health? How are these medications in real time helping this individual? And when you can then provide someone, a diabetic, a personalized care plan if they're using the CGM, but it's not as personalized if you're just using hemoglobin A1Cs every 3 months. And unfortunately, like sleep medicine is really behind because they don't even do a sleep study every 3 months. They just do a sleep study for diagnosis. There's nothing really for monitoring. And Empower Sleep allows patients to do continuous sleep testing using these like finger-based sensors to see what's working, what's not working. Like we can do this experiment on Michael. Like, hey, let's try giving Michael, an extra hour and let's see how his sleep architecture changes. If it changes for the better, I can be more prescriptive and I can get more buy-in from you to say, you know what, like actually my physiology is better this way. And it only makes sense for me to do this because if my physiology is better, then everything that I do during the day could be more optimal.
And just to clarify for anyone who doesn't know, when you say sleep opportunity as different than just saying sleep, that's like what's the difference there?
Sleep opportunity refers to how much time you give yourself in bed when you want to sleep. And total sleep time is like how much you actually sleep when you give yourself opportunity. So that sleep efficiency metric that one sees in many of these wearable devices, it's basically dividing total sleep time by total sleep opportunity, essentially. And then you want that to be sort of 85% or more. You don't want people being like awake in bed, essentially.
Now I feel like I need to go and test my sleep and figure out how screwed I am. So I appreciate it. Tell me what sort of drew you to this mission. Why is sleep sort of driving you and Sagar, both you guys? What was the inspiration?
I think it's been a couple of things. I think like we're both very passionate about healthcare to begin with. We've had some family experiences where family members have had bad outcomes from a healthcare standpoint. So we're generally very passionate about helping people in healthcare. And I particularly became really interested in sleep when I became aware of how big of a foundational component it is of anyone's health. And when you see that something is so important, and then you see how broken the system is, like it just kind of lit a fire underneath my bum to like, dude, we got to figure this out, because if we don't do it, like who will? And it's like, I almost feel like it's our responsibility to do this. And I think we've developed like a different method to approach the problem. And when you see what is possible And then, I still see patients on the platform. I have my own clinic and I see patients, and when I see on a daily basis, like the kind of impact we're having in people's lives, then it's like, it becomes like a no-brainer that, dude, it is our responsibility to continue doing what we're doing, because we have all these people that we're taking care of, and we're seeing like phenomenal outcomes from a sleep health standpoint, and there's like really no way going back.
Yeah, I guess what were those frustrations? Because I think everyone sort of thinks of the healthcare system as this big sort of behemoth. Maybe it's tough to tackle because it's so regulated. How did you guys decide, yes, it's heavily regulated, it's tough to crack, but we think we can do it? Like, what were those frustrations that kind of drove you to that?
I think like for me particularly, Sagar might have a different thought process or opinion about this. For me, it was like, I've invested so much time in my education and resources in my education. If I don't enjoy what I do, like, what's the point? Like, the idea of like just doing something for a paycheck, that is not very exciting to me. And like, I've invested like over a decade of training. I'm internal medicine, pulmonary critical care fellowship, sleep medicine training. It's like 7 years right there after medical school, right? And like, after doing that, if you feel like you're just going to be a cog in a system and you're not going to enjoy it, my mindset is like, screw that. Like, I'd rather like, die trying than just live paycheck to paycheck and, work for a paycheck. So for me, it was really that. And the fact that I felt that I had this domain expertise that I learned at Harvard. I work with like some really amazing people. And when you see like what is possible, and you then realize that, hey, you know what, like, you actually now have the team to execute upon this. It just feels like a internal responsibility to do that.
Do you think that gives you an advantage as a founder? Maybe during the hard times, because startups aren't always fun either, right? There's definitely the hard times, but if you have that intrinsic motivation, if you have the personal connection with your family as well, do you feel like that gives you more will to like power through that, or just a general advantage? How does that play into it?
Yeah, at least for me, mindset is everything. It's like everything in life, right? And whether it's the startup or being a parent or a son or a brother, like, having the right mindset and the right thoughts percolating in your mind are such a critical component. And so I think it does make a big difference, like being very, driven by mission and passion, and having the right mindset, at least for me, is a critical component of what we do. And I think it's like a massive advantage, because it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And if you can protect yourself from the negative thoughts that naturally percolate in your own mind, then like, and that's something that nobody else has control over other than yourself. And so I think it's a massive advantage of like getting through and pushing through and doing it in like as blissful of a state as possible.
What do you do to sort of, when you have those negative thoughts, when you have those concerns about, anything about the business, what do you tell yourself to bring it back to an even keel, and just move forward?
Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, it's tough. Like, I think it starts with awareness, like just even being aware that I'm creating more anxiety than I need to have right now. And I think in that moment, it's really hard to have that awareness, because you're just like, on this like anxiety roller coaster going a million miles an hour. So like, stepping away, for me, what I do, I don't know what works for other people, but for me, what I do is I step away, and I listen to like spiritual content, prayers, like different kinds of like Hindu and Sikhism like chants, and it really helps me like stay grounded. And and remind me that at the end of the day, this is just like a game that we're all playing, and it's whatever happens, like my responsibility is to just do my actions along the way and not be consumed in the fear of the future. And then when I tell myself that, it becomes much easier to not feel anxious. And because I feel like, so much of our anxiety and fear stems from what we think could happen in the future and what did not happen in the past.
That's true. That's true.
But if we like somehow figure out a way to talk ourselves through to just focus on what is right here, right now, a lot of that kind of dissipates, and just focus on like actions and moving forward and taking the next step. That's what I do for myself. And like I do my level best. And I think it just starts with a level of awareness that my mind is going in a direction that it probably should not go.
Yeah, I can imagine it makes it feel more manageable, just what's in front of you right now. It doesn't feel bigger than it is, or missed opportunities or anything like that. Do you feel like more founders should focus on problems and customers and products based on things that they've experienced themselves and feel super passionately about? Or do you feel like that's just sort of what works for me? Other people might do it differently.
Yeah, I think that just kind of works. At least that works for me. And I think everyone has to. I learned this from Sagar. Like a startup is, it's default dead. Yeah, and like getting it default alive requires like a Herculean amount of effort. And if you're not passionate about it, like solving a problem only because it's a problem to solve, I think it's really, I would imagine for me, that would be really hard to do. But like for me, if I'm like really deeply passionate about it and I think I have a creative solution for it, and I think I know how to execute upon it, it becomes a lot easier to continue to move forward.
And I mean, you guys definitely came up with a creative solution with Empower Sleep. It's not like sleep is a known market, let's say. I know it's a newer market in terms of venture scale businesses, but it's a known market. People have slept for as long as there have been people. How did you know that the timing was right for a venture scale business in this sort of like, as old as can be market and activity?
I think in the beginning I was ignorant. I didn't know that this was like a venture scale problem that could be solved. But as I talked, became more aware of the problem and saw how there were different ways to provide a solution, creative ways to provide a solution, then one becomes aware. And so I think that came with time, that came with, working with Sagar and Maxime and people who come from that background, because I had I come from the world of medicine, and it's a very sort of straightforward path. So I didn't really know until like we all started working together and brainstorming these things. But once we did, it was kind of like no looking back, and we need to help as many people as we can.
And then, I mean, you guys basically created this great user experience on top of this technology. And, what can founders who are listening to this sort of take away from that and learn from that experience about, just how important the packaging is to get it to the end user?
It's a critical component. And like we were kind of lucky in the sense that sleep itself was like filled with sleep care in the United States is filled with so much friction that we didn't really need to do much in the beginning. And, the initial sort of, we jokingly say this, like the V1 of Empower Sleep was me helping my colleagues. I would keep these disposable home sleep testing devices in the trunk of my car. And when somebody in the ICU or a friend or somebody would say, hey, dude, like my sleep sucks, I would just walk outside, open the trunk, pop in a battery, hand them the sensor, tell them to do the sleep study. Next day, jump on them on like FaceTime or Zoom, go over the results, and then like e-fax a prescription to the pharmacy or a medical equipment company so that they can get their CPAP machine or a medicine. So that was like, then this all happened like in 48 hours. And when like the traditional model is filled with so much friction, from referral to visiting a doctor to sleeping in a lab, and all this process takes like months. So luckily, like we started off solving a problem that had like a ton of friction. But as you start to stitch, at least for us, as we started to like stitch these different things together, having a good user experience where things are frictionless, like there should be zero friction to connect with your doctor. There should be zero friction to order a sleep study. There should be zero friction to get your results. There should be zero friction to receive your CPAP machine in the mail or have a medication going to your pharmacy. I think these are all like critical components of like the whole user journey, and there should be zero friction for the patient to be educated. Like, well, like it drives me nuts that they have to go to YouTube to learn how to like use a CPAP machine. Like we should be doing this in-house, right? And there's a lot of things that we still need to fix, but it's like way better than, it's 10x better than the standard of care. And, as long as we have everyone's support and blessings, we'll continue to solve these problems every day.
I love it, man. I love it. I love the story. I love the direction. I love where you guys are going. I have a couple kind of rapid fire questions for you if you're up for a little rapid fire round.
Yeah, totally.
So name an investor who other founders should take money from and why.
Oh, dude, this is like so easy. Ash Rust from Sterling Road Ventures. I love him, man. He has been so transformative for us, both in the form of like providing constructive feedback so what Ash does is he meets with founders every 2 weeks to track their progress. And we've been doing this for the last 2 years. And so he is like so involved in like a productive way. He helped, at least for me, like, I lacked a lot of confidence as a founder because I've been in medicine my entire life. And he's like helped me at least like see what I am capable and competent of doing. And that's what you want in an investor. Like, it's one thing you can go get money from a bank, but it's so much of like building a company is mindset. Like you want people that will help you uplift your mindset and help you achieve the goals that you're trying to do. And Ash does a phenomenal job at supporting us as an investor and like a coach to continue to build Empower Sleep in a way that of where we've sort of ended up.
What is one thing that you'd change about the startup world?
I would just love for more people, at least more physicians, to try to solve like complex problems in healthcare. Like I think having more physicians who are founders who are solving complex problems, I think it'll make the space a little bit better. It'll result in more innovation, but I don't know enough about the startup world to say like this is what I would change. I'm kind of like, we kind of live in our own world when you're like building, right? Like you're just racing with the earlier version of yourself every morning. And I think for me, it helps me when I look at it that way, it prevents me from getting distracted by what's happening around me and just focusing on how did I do yesterday and can I do better? And I think that's like kind of helped me to keep doing what I'm doing. And also at the same time, I think it's made me a little bit ignorant about the startup world of like what other people are doing. So I don't know. It's kind of a tough question for me.
What's your number one piece of advice for a first-time founder?
Don't overthink it and just go for it and continue to iterate until you get somewhere.
And last one, what's something you believe that most people disagree with you about?
I think the easy one is to make your sleep a priority. Like a lot of people, like they don't think that sleep should be a priority, but I can scientifically say that make your sleep a priority. And I almost guarantee you that you will operate with a higher level of efficiency if you can figure that out.
Well, I'm about to make my sleep a priority. I'm going to go do that test and I'll follow up in a couple of weeks. Well, Sahil, thanks so much for coming on, man. Great to chat, great to catch up, and love what you guys are doing with Empower Sleep. Where can folks find you and where can they find Empower online?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn and shoot me a message, or you can go to empowersleep.com and sign up if you have any sleep issues. Would love for the opportunity to take care of you. And if you're coming through this podcast, I'll make it a point to personally be involved in your care.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. That's great. You guys should take him up on that offer. Get some more folks coming through. But yeah, Sahil, thanks so much for coming on, man. This was great, and talk more soon.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for listening. I write up my main takeaways from every conversation and make them available to all of our members at foundingjourney.com, along with a bunch of other perks and more content. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to Founding Journey on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. I post a new episode every Thursday. Also, consider leaving us a rating or a review. As a brand new podcast, this is the best way for us to get out there and founders to find us. See you next time.